What if the love that established your family was the same thing that might destroy it in a courtroom, where every look, every decision, and every commitment was suddenly in the dock? Picture yourself in a courtroom, your whole lifestyle on trial, your family's future in the balance. That was the case for Kody Brown, the father America got to know via the popular TV show Sister Wives. The minute the Brown family was first rolled by the cameras back in 2010, viewers all over America were shocked. Kody Brown, with long blonde hair and a big smile, was a self-assured man who presented viewers with a family unlike any other that they'd seen on television before. He wasn't merely a husband, he wasn't merely a dad, he was the head of a big complicated family, a husband to several wives, and a father to over a dozen kids. To some, the Brown family symbolized love, harmony, and faith. To others, they symbolized controversy, taboo, and even illegality. But to the Browns themselves, they were living their life, a life constructed on spiritual values and personal freedom. For a time, their existence seemed nearly utopian. Cameras followed the children's laughter, the wife's late-night chat, and Kody's never-ending balancing act of attention, love, and duty. But beneath the laughter was a brewing storm, one that would ultimately sweep them from their doorstep and into the court system. The Browns resided in Utah, where there has been a long and complex history regarding polygamy. In the past, decades ago, polygamy was an integral part of mainstream Mormon life. However, following legal and political struggles, it was prohibited and rejected by both the state and the mainstream Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Nevertheless, the smaller families and groups such as the Browns quietly practiced the lifestyle, seeing it as a part of their faith and a matter of personal freedom. Kody himself frequently described how polygamy was not a matter of control or power for him, but rather family, choice, and love. His wives said the same. They weren't victims. They weren't forced. They believed in the way they lived. But when Sister Wives of TLC brought the spotlight to them, it took only a short while for the authorities to take notice. The program was an instant success, attracting millions of viewers. For the Browns, this was an opportunity to share their story on their own terms. For prosecutors in the state, it was a glare on what they saw as an unlawful act. It wasn't long before the Brown family knew they were in trouble. Word circulated that Utah prosecutors were closely monitoring them. Neighbors talked behind their backs. Reporters asked tough questions. And then, one afternoon, the Browns received a message. The state was thinking of opening a criminal investigation. Picture the fear then. Picture sitting in your family dining room, your children around you, knowing that the individuals who are sworn to serve and protect families could become the ones who are destroying yours. Kody Brown knew this wasn't personal. If he got arrested, what would become of his wives? What would become of his children? Would they be torn from each other and spread out into foster care, made to renounce the life they had always lived? The Browns had always accepted their lifestyle, was risky, but now the danger was real, palpable, and frightening. Rather than wait for handcuffs, the Browns took a bold action. They took it on the offensive. They would not conceal. They would not flee. They would take their case to court and call into question the very laws that endangered them. This was a bold move, both to prosecutors and the public. Few such families had ever had the courage to do so. Most kept quiet, lived in hiding, and prayed not to catch the attention of the law. The Browns did the opposite. They walked into the center of the system and declared, "We will not be treated as criminals for loving our family." It was this moment, this radical choice, that transformed the Browns from reality TV personalities into courtroom warriors. When the Browns finally did make it to court, the drama was electric. Reporters, critics, and fans filled the courthouse. Camera operators rolled in, filming every possible angle. The family sat together inside, anxious but resolute. The courtroom itself was like a stage. State prosecutors on one side rummaged through their documents, poised to make the argument that the Browns were willfully breaking Utah's anti-polygamy statutes. Sitting on the opposite side was Kody, with his wives by his side, his children in the gallery watching. The consequences could not have been greater. If the Browns lost, Kody might be charged with a crime. His wives might be questioned by the law. Their children might be brought into an ordeal of government intrusion. But when the judge walked in, and the gavel came down, the Browns stood proud. This was not merely about law. This was about survival. The scary aspect of the start wasn't that the Browns had been investigated. It was what their case meant. For generations, polygamy had been mentioned in whispers, frequently linked to tales of horror involving abuse, coercion, or cult-like domination. But the Browns were not like that. They lived openly. They spoke freely. They presented the world with a different image. A family constructed not upon compulsion, but upon desire. Their case wasn't so much about whether Kody Brown violated the law. It was about whether the law itself was constitutional, fair, or just. And so, as session one of their court experience came about, the Browns weren't only battling for themselves, they were battling for the right of every American to determine family on their own terms. Beyond the constitutional language and technical arguments, this was ultimately a human story. The wives confessed to nights without sleep, fearing that their children would wake up one morning to discover their father gone. The children, though young, mumbled questions no child should have to pose. Will the police take Dad away? Are we bad because of how we live? These moments gave the case a human heartbeat. This wasn't an abstract legal debate. It was a family's daily reality. And so, the shocking beginning set the stage for everything that would follow. The Browns, once just reality TV figures, were now the center of a national legal drama. Every camera angle, every headline, every courtroom sketch reminded the world that this wasn't fiction. It was real. It was raw. It was history coming alive on television for millions of people. The gavel came down, the courtroom fell silent, and in that instant the Browns were no longer simply a family. They were defendants, standing eyeball to eyeball with the state of Utah, not only battling for their freedom but for their very right to live the way they had. The prosecutors, stern-faced and well-rehearsed, sat on one side of the gleaming wood courtroom. Their task was easy looking on paper. Establish that Kody Brown and his wives were living in defiance of Utah's anti-polygamy statutes. But the task was deeper. The Browns weren't hiding. They had appeared on national TV, openly proclaiming their plural marriage. Evidence was abundant. Video clips, interviews, even Twitter posts. The prosecutors relied heavily on history, depicting polygamy as a practice associated with abuse, coercion, and inequality. They claimed that there were laws in place for a reason, because society needed protecting from harm. They cited examples of previous cases where polygamy was being used as a disguise for exploitation. Their mission was obvious: connect the Browns' way of life to those other bad stories, and get the judge to believe that the law needed to prevail, regardless of how peaceable this family reportedly was. Across from them sat Kody and his wives, serene but unflappable. They knew they weren't guilty. They knew their children weren't victims. And they were committed to proving it. Their defense did not dispute the facts. Indeed, Kody did have more than one wife. Indeed, they all lived together as a single family. But facts are not crimes. What was the damage? Who had been harmed? The Browns' lawyers contended that this was not about crime. It was about choice. They based their defense on constitutional rights. The right of freedom of religion, the right of freedom of association, the freedom to raise a family free from the interference of the government. The courtroom was soon a war of concepts: morality versus freedom, tradition versus advancement, law versus conscience. At one time even Kody spoke. His voice wasn't boisterous or confrontational, but firm with conviction. I am not a criminal. I am a father. I am a husband. My children are not victims. They are loved. We immigrated to this country to be free in faith and free in choice. And yet here I am on trial because I chose to love more than one woman. The words reverberated in the courtroom. Journalists wrote furiously. Some nodded in agreement. Others furrowed their brows. But all knew they were seeing something that sliced deeper than law texts. Every wife had her turn to testify. Their voices were quiet, but each one bore the burden of years of judgment and misunderstanding. Christine discussed how she volunteered for this life, how her faith led her to accept being in a plural marriage. Mary expressed how the world did not understand them, instead focusing on reducing their love to scandal and stereotypes. Janelle highlighted their children's strength: educated, beloved, and prosperous. None of them reconciled with the portrait the prosecutors were attempting to set. They were not intimidated women, but strong voices standing up for their decisions. Although most of the children were not old enough to testify on the stand, they were present everywhere. The Browns' lawyers always reminded the court that this was not merely about grown-ups. It was about the future of over a dozen children who had committed no crime. What message do we send to these children? One lawyer asked. If we tell them that their family is illegal, that the love they see every day in their home is somehow criminal. The courtroom fell silent. Even those who were in opposition to polygamy couldn't answer that question. Outside the courthouse, the drama was just as intense. Protesters on both sides of the debate found each other. Some carried signs that read "Protect families, not criminalize them," while others chanted "Polygamy is abuse." News vans clogged the streets. Experts debated on TV every evening. Some viewed the Browns as courageous pioneers. Others labeled them as irresponsible lawbreakers. The Browns' faces graced front pages and news tickers nationwide. What had been a private family matter suddenly became a national debate on freedom, morality, and law. The state's attorneys homed in on one overarching theme: if we let this family off the hook, we open the door to abuse. They contended that laws against polygamy were in place to safeguard children and women from abuse. To them, the Browns were a harmful precedent. They referenced fringe polygamous communities, where abuse had taken place, and attempted to tie the Browns into that. The problem was that no such evidence of abuse had occurred in the Browns' situation. The prosecutors relied more on fear of what might occur than evidence of what did occur. The lawyers for the Browns brought that argument back to the state. Your Honor, the government should not punish individuals because of fear of what may occur. These are consenting adults. They live openly, their children are successful. The law is not safeguarding anyone here. It is punishing a family because they are different. The words touched on the core of the case. Was the law concerning justice, or was it concerning control? As the trial dragged on, the Browns felt the toll of emotion. Weeks of testimony, countless interviews, and relentless media scrutiny weighed on them. Kody acknowledged in quiet moments that he was worried about losing not only the case, but the cohesion of his family. But the family supported one another. There were late nights spent whispering prayers, hugs, and reassurances to the children. No matter what happens, Kody said to them, we are together. The case was not an easy one for the judge. On the one hand, the law was straightforward. Utah made polygamy illegal. On the other hand, the Browns had presented no evidence of harm, no criminal intent, no victims. The question was bigger than the Browns. Should the state get to dictate family for all, or should families get to decide for themselves? As Session 2 adjourned, the Browns hung in the balance. Prosecutors pressed, defense resisted, and the nation held its breath. Would the law destroy a family that had been brave enough to live another way? Or would the Browns win a triumph not only for themselves, but for choice of freedom throughout America? The courtroom lights went down for the day, but the fight had only just started. Every great courtroom fight comes down to that one moment. The essence of the argument. For Kody Brown and his family, the moment wasn't about laws penned in old books or statistics gleaned from the past. It was about freedom, dignity, and the very basic right to love without fear. By the time the case came to its climax, the courtroom had already been saturated with weeks of testimony, courtroom jousting, and high emotion. But Session 3 was distinct. This was when both sides honed their arguments to their essence. For the prosecutors, their task was to establish that Utah's anti-polygamy statute was required for the protection of society. For the Browns, their task was to establish that the law itself was broken, that families were being punished who had committed no wrong. The atmosphere was thick. Every sentence counted. Every word had gravity. The state began with what they termed their essential truth. Your Honor, the senior prosecutor started out. The law is not opposed to love, but opposed to practices that have traditionally hurt women and children. The Browns can look innocent, but if we set this precedent, we are opening the door to more sinister expressions of polygamy, control, abuse, and coercion. They quoted past instances where little girls had been coerced into marriage, where women were voiceless, and where the leaders employed polygamy as a power tool. To the prosecutors, the Browns' household was merely a glossed-up version of a threatening custom. It had nothing to do with Kody, Mary, Janelle, Christine, or Robin. It had everything to do with what message Utah was sending to the world. And the prosecutors wanted the message to be clear. Polygamy in any shape or form would not stand. Next came the Browns' turn. Their attorney stood before the judge. "Your Honor," he declared, his voice calm, "the state has presented you with fear. But we are here to present you with facts." He reminded the court that there was no history of abuse in the Browns' home. None of the wives were coerced. None of the children were neglected. In fact, the children were prospering, succeeding at school, involved in their community, and proud of their family. "The state punishes not crimes," the lawyer went on, "but the very existence of this family. And that, Your Honor, is unconstitutional." The argument hit at the foundation of the case, whether adults had the right to structure their family as they chose, so long as no harm was being done. But the moment that turned the courtroom came not from the lawyers but from Kody himself. When he took the stand, the room went silent. He began not as a defendant, but as a father. "I stand and look at my children each evening," Kody explained, the emotion in his voice causing it to crack, "and I see innocence, trust, and love. They have no idea why the world considers us criminals. They have no idea why their family is less than. How do I explain to them that the love that constructed our home can also annihilate it?" He went silent, the hush lingering like a burden. "I am not here to request permission. I am here to request liberty. The liberty to love. The liberty to build a family. The liberty guaranteed by our Constitution. That is all." Reporters frantically jotted down notes. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as if the gravity of those words required closer scrutiny. Kody's words were strong, but what came next may have been stronger still. His wives' collective testimonies. Each wife shared her tale, not as a victim but as a woman who made her own choices. "Mary, I chose this life because it satisfied me. I was not coerced. I was not deceived. I believe in this and I believe in Kody." "Christine, they think that we're oppressed. I am not oppressed. I am empowered. I chose this family. I chose this love." "Janelle, I am educated, independent, and strong. I can walk away at any moment, but I don't, because this is the life that I want." Isn't that the definition of freedom? "Robin, the state tells us they need to protect us. But we don't need protection from our own lifestyle. What we need is for people to respect our freedom to make them." Their voices pierced through stereotypes. They didn't sound like cult victims. They sounded like empowered women seeking acknowledgement of their lifestyle. Although the children were not summoned to the stand, their presence loomed like a specter over each statement. The Browns' lawyers frequently gestured toward them in the stands. "These children," they testified, "are raised in a home that is full of love. If the state gets its way, they will lose their father, lose their stability, lose everything. What harm can be greater? The harm of an untraditional family, or the harm of dismantling a family?" It was a question no prosecutor could answer neatly. At its essence, Session 3 broadened the trial beyond the Browns. It was no longer simply about polygamy. It was about the Constitution itself. The defense claimed that criminal statutes prohibiting polygamy infringed freedom of religion. Adults should be free to practice their religion, even if it was plural marriage. Freedom of association. The state had no authority to determine who could cohabit as a family. Equal protection under the law. The Browns were worthy of the same respect as any other consenting household. The prosecutors replied that the Constitution did not shield risky practices, regardless of whether they were religious. They maintained that the state had an obligation to stop exploitation before it occurred. The judge now had a dilemma. Where did freedom end and state authority begin? As the arguments progressed, the courtroom crowd responded in waves. Brown supporters nodded and whispered support. Detractors frowned, shaking heads at what they perceived as dangerous precedent. The media outside was similarly split. Headlines included, "Browns assert polygamy is a constitutional right. Can love defy the law?"
Sister wives stars bring freedom battle to the courts.
The country was paying attention, and each word uttered in court was amplified 1,000-fold by cameras, microphones, and headlines. The most poignant moment occurred late in session 3, when Kody was confronted with a simple yet potent question. If the law does not change, will you stop living as a polygamist? Kody didn't blink. No, he stated firmly. I will never abandon my family. I will never leave behind my wives, my children, the love that makes me who I am. If that makes me a criminal to the law, then so be it. But to my children, I will always be their father. And that is what is most important. The room became quiet. Some journalists afterward reported that in that instant, the trial no longer was about polygamy, but about something human, the right to define family. By the end of session 3, both sides had exposed their best arguments. The prosecutors cautioned against a slippery slope toward anarchy. If polygamy were permitted, the Browns depicted a picture of love, freedom, and dignity. The judge remained still, listening to each word. No decision had been made, but one thing was certain. Whatever that decision was, it would reverberate far beyond the Browns' home. Each protracted courtroom fight has a moment when the tide turns, when all the tension and testimony culminate in one crack in the wall of certitude. For Kody Brown and his brood, that turning point arrived with a ruling that shook Utah and resonated across America. Weeks had become months. The case of the Browns dragged on, draining all parties involved. The lawyers for the family had presented their constitutional claims. The prosecutors had pounded away with history and fear, and the judge had sat, taking meticulous notes, his face impassive. For the Browns, each day was an eternity. Nights were fitful, spent in hushed prayers, silent tears, and hours talking to their children. Would the freedom they knew come to an end? Would Kody emerge from the courthouse a free man, or be taken away in handcuffs? The waiting wasn't difficult, only for the family. Millions of viewers across America were waiting as well. Sister Wives fans argued online. News anchors aired hot panels. And outside the courthouse, protesters and supporters kept battling. But then the moment came. On a chilly morning, the courtroom filled again. There were reporters packed in the gallery, notebooks and cameras at the ready. The Browns sat in a row together in the front, hands locked, their faces strained. When the judge entered and the gavel came down, silence descended. He started slowly, recognizing the intricacy of the case. He perused the arguments, the testimonies, the constitutional assertions, and the historical anxieties. His sentences appeared to go on and on forever, each one creating suspense. Then arrived the turning point. In this court's opinion, the judge proclaimed, "The state of Utah cannot criminalize private consensual adult relationships when there is no evidence of harm." Although bigamy in the technical sense, having multiple marriage licenses, is still illegal, the practice of cohabitation with multiple partners as a family is constitutionally protected. The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Kody's wives grasped each other's hands. Kody himself shut his eyes, releasing a breath he had been holding for years. Their children, sitting quietly in back rows, grinned. For the first time in many years, the Browns felt hopeful. They weren't criminals. They weren't fugitives. They were just a family. Tears streamed down Mary's face. Christine whispered a prayer. Janelle squeezed Kody's hand so tightly he later joked he nearly lost circulation. And Robin, the youngest wife, looked upward as if thanking the heavens. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was validation. Outside the courthouse, pandemonium broke out. Reporters scrambled to air the breaking news. Supporters erupted in cheers, waving signs that said love wins and families deserve freedom. Protesters cried out in outrage, threatening that society was collapsing. Headlines burst across the country. Sister Wives family wins historic court ruling. Polygamy law struck down in Utah. Case Kody Brown case redefines family freedom. The Browns were no longer reality TV personalities. They were history makers. But that wasn't the end of it. Prosecutors were outraged. The ruling to them was a threatening precedent. They claimed that the judge had left the door open to abuse, cult-like domination, and anarchy. Within hours, the state appealed. This is not merely one family, said the prosecution at a press conference. This is about upholding the most vulnerable in our society. We will not let polygamy gain legal traction under the guise of freedom. The war in the courts was by no means won. But to the Browns, this initial win was important. It allowed them to return home that evening without worrying about being arrested. It allowed their children to sleep without terror of losing their father. The decision set off heated arguments throughout America. For some, it was a move toward freedom and acceptance. For others, it was a threat to traditional values. On television talk shows, experts debated if consenting adults want this lifestyle. Why should the government step in? But if we permit this, what's next? Where is the line? The Browns themselves spoke in interviews. Unflustered but resolute. We're not inviting anyone to live as we do, Kody clarified on nationwide television. We're merely asking for the right to live as we wish. Unafraid. The wives were in agreement with him. We are not victims, Christine asserted. We are a family. And now the court has seen us for who we are. Even in victory, the Browns, however, knew the price. The trial had cost them emotionally and financially. Their personal lives had been examined under the microscope in public. Their children had had cruel remarks hurled at school, and their religion had been ridiculed in the press. Certain neighbors grew cold. Certain friends drifted away. And even in the family, the tension produced fissures that would widen later. But at this moment, all of that was irrelevant. They had faced the state, faced the law, and they had not broken. Apart from the Browns themselves, the decision became a symbol. It represented the struggle for religious freedom to some. To others, it stood for the more general issue of how much control the government should exert over private life. Legal experts argued whether this case would hold sway in future decisions regarding marriage rights. Civil liberties organizations hailed the ruling as a victory for individual freedom. Critics denounced it as a slippery slope toward eroding traditional marriage. Whatever the spin, one reality was indisputable. The Browns had compelled America to face issues it had shunned for so long. As the Browns emerged from the courthouse on that day, surrounded by blinding lights and microphones, Kody looked at his children and promised them something. This is not the end, he said. This is just the beginning. We will keep fighting. We will keep loving. And we will never let anyone tell us that our family is not real. The children embraced him tightly, holding on to the man who had just demonstrated love stood tall against the law. And yet, even as the Browns rejoiced, the specter of appeal hung over everything. The state intended to reverse the decision. The battle wasn't finished. It was merely moving to the next phase. Would the Browns' win stand in the higher courts? Would their new liberty endure? Or would the tide turn out to be short-lived? Only a temporary reprieve before the tempest rolled in once more. For the present, all they could do was bask in the triumph which they had so long and arduously fought for. Some fights end in silence, some in applause. But the Browns' court battle left behind an echo that continues to define discussions of family, freedom, and faith to this day. When the Browns exited the courthouse following their first big victory, the air was charged with victory. Fans cheered, cameras snapped, and headlines hailed the family's historic resistance. For the first time, Kody and his wives felt free to breathe. But winning in court didn't translate into peace of life. Their court battle was far from over. Utah threatened to appeal within minutes, intent on reversing the verdict. The Browns had won a war, but a war remained ongoing. Back at home, the family attempted to get back to normal. Kids returned to school, wives went back to routines, and cameras for sister wives continued to roll. But nothing was really normal anymore. Each knock on the door caused them to jump. Each news broadcast reminded them that the state wasn't finished with them. Predictably, the state appealed. The case worked its way up the judicial ladder, where new judges with fresh eyes considered the arguments. The result this time wasn't as good. The appeals court reversed some of the previous ruling, trimming the Browns' win. Although immediately not threatened with criminal prosecution, the legal vindication of their rights was eroded. The family was hit hard. They tasted freedom and it was partially yanked away. But even in defeat, they would not surrender. Our lives aren't a case file, Kody told an interviewer. We're real people. We're a family. And no matter how many times the state comes after us, we will keep standing. By then, years of legal battles had worn them down. The Browns had spent thousands on lawyers. Their privacy had been destroyed. Their children suffered constant rumors and harassment in school. Even in the family, stress made its mark. Quarrels became sharper. Tempers were high. And fault lines began to appear in relationships that had once appeared absolutely secure. Some of these faults would lead to breakups and splits in later years. But throughout it all, the family held fast to the memory of why they'd fought in the beginning: that no one should be criminalized for love. The Browns' case did more than impact their household. It compelled the nation into an uncomfortable but much-needed conversation. Supporters argued that the case was about liberty. If adults freely chose plural marriage, who was the government to interfere? Wasn't America built on freedom of religion and choice? Critics warned that legalizing polygamy in any form could lead to exploitation, inequality, and harm to women and children. To them, the Browns family was an exception, not the rule. Talk shows discussed it. Politicians spoke about it. College classrooms examined it. The Browns were more than just a family. They were a symbol. Television served a dual purpose in the Browns' legacy. On the one hand, sister wives provided them with a platform to demonstrate their humanity. Viewers were shown cooking dinner, celebrating birthdays, and battling the same problems as any other family. It tempered stereotypes and demonstrated that polygamy wasn't always cults or secret compounds. Alternatively, fame amplified their struggles. Each argument was picked apart by tabloids. Each decision was second-guessed. And each courtroom development made headline news. The family was not only subjected to legal judgment but public scrutiny as well. Despite it all, they remained steadfast. If our story gives hope to even one family, Mary once told the Deseret News, then it's worth it. Beyond the Browns, the case influenced broader debates about marriage and freedom. Legal scholars pointed out that the arguments made in the Browns' defense mirrored those used in same-sex marriage cases: freedom of association, equality under the law, and the right to choose love without government interference. Although polygamy never received widespread legal approval, the Browns' battle opened up doors. It made lawmakers and courts rethink long-standing laws. And it provided a new generation with the vocabulary to ask why the state had jurisdiction over private relationships. Even as the legal struggle went on, Sister Wives stayed on the air and made the Browns into reality TV's longest-running family. Fans witnessed their relationships change, marriages fray, and children become adults under the glare of the public eye. The courtroom drama was only one chapter in an even larger book of strength. For some, the battle in the courtroom was the most inspiring moment. For others, it was the day-to-day fight and victories that demonstrated the Browns' staying power. Either way, their courtroom suit made them a part of history as more than performers. They were defiers of the law. Decades later, the Browns' courtroom fight is still a complicated legacy. On the one hand, they're remembered as heroes who refused to confront unjust laws and emerged victorious, at least partially. On the other, cracks appeared in their private lives, evidence that even the most robust families can fracture under stress. But that may be what made their tale so compelling. They weren't perfect. They weren't invincible. They were human. Imperfect, flawed, but unwilling to back down from what they knew was right. What did America learn from the Browns' battle in court? Freedom ain't easy, not even in a country founded on freedom. Is liberty absolute? The Browns pushed the envelope and exposed the conflict between state power and individual rights. Families come in many forms. The case made Americans face the fact that families aren't uniform. There are nuclear, there are blended, and there are like. The Browns plural. The law is human. Laws aren't immutable truths. They are composed by humans, and can be questioned by humans. The Browns demonstrated that even regular families can resist systems that appear unmovable. It's been years since the courtroom wars. In a moment of reflection, Kody Brown encapsulated the legacy. We didn't win everything. We didn't change every law. But we told our story. We stood up. And we showed our children that no matter what the world says, you never hide who you are. That's the real victory. The Browns' courtroom battle started as a struggle to live. It turned into a national sensation. And it concluded as a lesson about liberty, love, and tenacity. Even today, years after the gavel finally fell, their case continues to reverberate.
In classrooms, courtrooms, and living rooms, individuals still pose the questions the Browns brought into the light. What constitutes a family? Who determines it? And is love ever supposed to be a crime? The Browns did not resolve those questions forever, but they ensured America could no longer close its ears to them. And that, rather than any court decision, is their real legacy.